And here we go. Welcome.
Hey everybody, this is
How's it
Deborah.
going?
I'm here from Althea, and I'm here with Justin Kilpatrick, who is the Althea CTO, and our special guest Jordan Reed from Adaptive Broadband, who will be partnering with for some Althea deployments in Oregon and perhaps beyond. And I'm really excited to hear a little bit more about your perspective as a wireless ISP provider on Althea in the system, and where you see that maybe potentially integrating with your existing network. So before we get into the fun stuff, I thought I'd give you all just like a quick update of some of the things that are happening. And on the community side of things, our existing networks continue to grow. In Enfield, North Carolina, we have a network growing there. We have a few other networks in Oregon, one in Napa that is organized by Steven there, who is now a profitable network operator, which is really exciting. It didn't take him too long, about a month between initial deployment and profitability. So that is not too bad, and definitely a testament to his work and that things actually can be implemented quickly. We also have decent communications in Tucson, Arizona that we'll be launching shortly. We have a new network that started in Watertown, Tennessee that has a few nodes up. And we have Elvis there with the, I believe it is the Northwest Broadband Alliance in Montana, in Missoula, who has got the backhaul on the way, and we'll have a network probably in less than 30 days. So that's pretty exciting for that neck of the woods, as well as a bunch of other little projects in the works that we'll be excited to share with you as things move on. And then Justin, you want to give us like the 2-minute tech highlight, and then we'll circle back to you about kind of some stuff along the blockchain and some of the tech updates.
Yeah, so the 2-minute tech highlight is that we just started rolling out Beta 15 or C4 to everybody. This has a new, more stable token bridge for wire deposits where you deposit ETH. And this solves a lot of the recent fee issues people have had and reduces the cost a good bit given the new gas fees. That's really the main line. That's really the only visible improvement there. But there's actually a lot of under the hood fixes. We're finally starting our migration to Rust async await, which will make the code look a lot better in general, as well as more stable. But nothing really user facing at the moment. Just bug fixes and improvements and little things. It's a really happy day when you get to fix a bug that only gets encountered once every million hours of runtime, and that's typically where we are right now.
Yeah, and we'll share with y'all some kind of our roadmap and some of the exciting things that we're working on under the hood a little bit later in the conversation. Do also want to flag that you're welcome to put questions in the chat. I'm happy to answer those as we go along, and or have discussions about what y'all want to talk about. If you have questions or comments, and if we don't get to them here, please feel free to jump in our Discord or message us on Twitter or something, and we'll be happy to make sure we get those conversations in at a later. But first of all, I wanted to just chat with you, Jordan, a little bit. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background and what your business is about, and kind of give us a sense of what you've been doing.
So much like a lot of people who get into the WISP industry, I didn't have a lot of experience when I first started. 6 years ago now, I took over a company that was going out of business. They had 500 customers at one point in time, and then they sort of just let the whole thing slip. And by the time I got around to taking over, I believe we only had 65 customers left. And I pretty much knew nothing about the internet at the time, other than that it was needed in an area where I lived. And so I kind of took the mantle of just making it work. And we've been growing very steadily ever since then. I think this year we're on track to do 200 new subscribers with a team of what was 2 people up until February and is now 4 people. And so I think for us, one of the biggest things has been efficiency. Like, how do you squeeze the most time into a day, or the most jobs into the time that you have in a day? And I think that that's something that we've really been focused on, especially with COVID, where everything is 10 times more complicated and requires 10 times more follow through. And so I know that in our conversations, that's one of the things that has really interested me, is the ability to increase efficiency in the network. And it seems like these days, most of my service calls are related to people needing to update their credit card information or make some kind of changes to their billing. And so the prospect of offloading that onto a network that is self-sufficient in handling that has been something that I've been very interested in. Um, Lately, we've been growing a lot just based on word of mouth outreach, and I feel like this sort of community involvement type of deployment increases the ability for you to do that in a more efficient way, which makes your customer onboarding costs lower, which is always the goal. And then just in general, I think that collaborations between providers is something that is sort of an untapped field right now, because a lot of people are, fighting over table scraps because there wasn't ever really a model put forth that allowed people to collaborate in a way that wasn't sacrificing someone's business to get to someone else's business. And so that also has been something that this model is very attractive to me in that sense, because it allows you to reach out to people and say, hey, we have a way to collaborate where we can both get paid and everybody feels like they are whole at the end of the day, versus you having to give subscribers to me or me having to give subscribers to you. And then also the ability to implement this sort of as like an edge network, where we might already have a network established because we've been doing service in that area for a long time. But this ability to put an Althea router at the edge of our network and then sign new subscribers onto that, especially in areas where maybe the package pricing and models that we're implementing right now aren't affordable to current residents because of the coronavirus, or just in lower income areas where maybe they have $20 today, but they don't have it next week, and getting billing issues with those people where we're having to constantly call them and beg them to pay us takes up a lot of time, and it just decreases the amount of stuff that you're able to do in a day. And so anything that we can do to sort of, and it's also not fun to call your customers and tell them that they owe you money. Nobody likes that, to be the bill collector. And so giving the customer the ability to sort of manage that on their own also removes their ability to call and complain at you when you shut their service off, or when they have some kind of issue related to their service, because that's something that now becomes their responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you hit like all of our like points that the reasons that we also kind of resonate as well, and think we're solving a lot of those same problems. One of the things I think that when we first started talking that we really resonated on was this sort of not only the community involvement model, but this idea of like getting better performance by having radios kind of closer together in a micro pop fashion. And you were already like doing a lot of that, and I think you were already seeing better results than your competitors in the area by this kind of model. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how that works.
That was more of an accidental discovery than a network design from the get-go. A lot of it stemmed from the fact that when I started, we only had one tower, and this is one giant tower on a mountain that overlooks almost all of our coverage area, but it's also shared by 3 other providers who already had established footprints there and lots of radios. And so we were barely able to run like a 45-degree sector in 10 megahertz and get enough spectral efficiency to make anything happen. And at the time, based on my limited knowledge of how the internet works, my only solution to that was to find internet in other places. So we started calling up local providers, CenturyLink, Comcast, anybody that would give me the time of day. And we dropped fiber in our network in places that allowed us to kind of jump it off of there. And I'm pretty blessed in this area that we have a lot of big grain silos and windmills and really just tall structures that aren't really being used for anything. So sort of based on that community model, we went out to our subscribers and our customer base and said, hey, look, you have these vertical assets that either, the windmills in this area, the government put them up and then abandoned them and left the farmers with all of the maintenance. So we went to them and said, hey, look, we're willing to pay you whatever amount of money in order for us to use these vertical assets. And then you'll become this beacon of internet in the community, and especially in rural communities, everybody knows. Like if you get your internet from Joe's house down the street, everybody knows about it. And that gives him a sense of pride that he's doing good for his community. And then through doing that, mostly out of necessity, we started noticing that we were able to provide a lot more bandwidth to people because it was separated out throughout the network, and that our deployment costs were actually lower because once you get that tower up, you're not having to use a power beam or a bigger dish radio that's costing 100 and 120 bucks a deployment. You're able to use maybe a loco that's only $50, and then your deployment cost is 1/3 of what it would have been otherwise. So sort of a sum of all parts. Once we started doing it, we realized that it was actually a much better deployment model. And then up until recently, we wwere running the whole network with no redundancy. So it was that solid of a model that we really never felt the need to come back and put up redundant links. But now that we've gotten to the point where we have enough customers and a big enough network, I'm tired of answering those service calls. So we started to put up some redundancy with a lot of help from people like you and other people that I've met in the various WISP talk groups, Facebook and otherwise. And I definitely think, and a lot of our competitors too kind of use that same model where they have all these customers jam-packed onto a tower because they feel like they have to make the most money out of it. But when I sat down and started to do the math, we were spending more money on truck rolls than we were actually saving by not having this vast web of network. And I think I did the count the other day, and we're up to 58 micropop sites now, 2 main distribution sites where we have high-grade fiber connections, and then everything else, with the exception of 1 tower, 2 towers that we put up, everything else is community deployments on houses. I mean, we do single-story houses with a 5-foot tripod, 2 light AP 120s, and a 19 or an Air Fiber 5X backhaul. And you serve 30 customers off that house for $150. I mean, you can only wish for those kind of deployment costs. So that's where, to me, it just made sense to continue on that.
Yeah, so that's essentially what like Althea is like standardizing that model. It's like, hey, that makes sense. It's cheaper to deploy. It's faster to deploy. It's already there. Your radios are going to work better. You're going to have better performance. You're going to have redundancy. And if you just standardize this into a model, you can iterate and roll out and scale.
And I think the one thing that we struggled the most with in that respect is how do you communicate to the homeowner or the business owner or the property owner, like, what is this value to you? And I really like the way that you guys approach that and saying this value to you is how much data goes through the network. So if this tower becomes something that's very important, then you're going to be compensated accordingly, because right now we have to write reports up for a lot of our tower guys that say, hey, we have 20 people connected to your tower. This is how much money we're generating off of it. It takes me a long time to do all that math, which goes back to efficiency again. And so I think just being able to roll all of that up into one thing where you can push a button and it prints out the report and everybody sees everything on the up and up, to where there's no conversation, because no one knows. Joe down the street thinks we have 500 people hooked up to his tower, and the only thing he knows is that cell phone companies pay $100,000 a year for tower space. Then he sort of reflects that onto me and what he wants me to pay for that. So I think having a model where you can go to somebody and say it's the same for everybody, nobody gets special treatment, and it really is just based on how important you are in the network. I think that's very, very attractive model for that sort of payment method.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Another kind of question I have is, obviously you've been in the business for a while now, is where do you see, what kind of trends do you see happening down the next, 10 years? What's the next 10 years of fixed wireless look like to you?
I think a lot of the deployments are going to go to short hop 60 gigahertz in the same way that a lot of the cell phone stuff is going to 5G with really short 60 gigahertz links. And I think a lot more you're going to start to see like the intermingling of brands where maybe Ubiquiti doesn't quite cut it for what you need. I know we're looking at some of the Cambium Medusa equipment, but then it sort of is an issue of I like to manage everything from a single place, and then having 2 different kinds of equipment means that you have to have 2 different people who understand how to use it. And so we've been sort of looking at some ways to kind of get that all into one management interface where you can just log in and see, sort of like a dude server. And I know UNMS kind of has that, but they all have their limitations. And so rather than having to manage 7 or 8 pieces of software, it's that's kind of a goal that we've been headed towards, is intermingling deployments so that you might be able to put up a 10, because we have this micropop infrastructure where some of our customers have 3 or 4 towers within a mile of them. We're able to kind of focus on using some 80 gigahertz links in places where we need them. And so I think that sort of community deployment model is something that's going to be very important to everybody in the future, but more so to people in rural communities or communities that are sort of more dependent on community involvement to get by, which is a lot of the places where we do service out here are just unincorporated areas. They're not even towns. And so if you can kind of get onto that model of community involvement. And we've been getting a lot of interest from governments and nonprofit associations about now that there is internet available to these rural places, like what sort of options can we pursue, ag tech or smart city management applied to these more rural places that would lower maintenance costs for the city, and just increase the overall quality of life for residents in that area. And also, I think people are starting to see internet more as like an economic growth driver, where before it was sort of seen as a public utility, like you just needed to get online to check your Facebook. Now people are starting to see that for every dollar you dump into a system of internet for people, it returns $4 or $5 or $6 back to that community, because those people are able to increase their productivity, and especially in a work from home environment. If you have people that can't even get online to check their email, and they're having to spend 2 hours in the car driving back and forth to get to a McDonald's so that they can have video conference chats with people in the McDonald's parking lot, that just is a huge drain on the system and a huge consumption of resources. And I think as people start to be able to get over the all or nothing mentality of service and sort of commingle their development and deployment, you're going to start to see a lot of stuff. We're working with a company that does like smart ag drones right now, where they hook their drones up to a wireless network, fly them around, and they monitor fields and check water levels. They can go for city parks and alert the city of areas that need to be watered. So you might be able to do 3 or 4 people's worth of work with a drone, and then you can just dispatch your city employees to kind of handle those situations as they arise. A lot of in the same way that we manage our networks like that. So I think you're going to start to see sort of this bleed over of all these ideas, because with 5G and just general connectivity in general, people are going to start to be able to handle that a lot better.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Justin, did you want to plug our like interoperable, vendor neutral management interface?
Oh, how did you guess, Deborah? I wonder. So, yeah, what we've done with Althea, and especially with our operator tools, is that we've tried to make them vendor agnostic, so that you can easily manage many different models of radio, and that way you can mix and match links as necessary, and you get the advanced routing and traffic control that is in Althea, software, without necessarily paying for somebody like Cambium, who actually bothers to think that it may not always be the best idea to insert 200 milliseconds of latency into a link. I'm sorry, I love throwing shade at Ubiquiti for that. So yeah, that sort of stuff is really where we see Althea is kind of pushing, is sort of providing automated routing, providing automated tooling, doing a lot of the advanced stuff, and making that plug and play. The things that really advanced WISPs do with routing and automated failover and monitoring, all of that should come built into every device, and it should be agnostic to the actual links, because you want to have more antennas closer together to use more frequency. Because if you think about it, frequency is only really a hot commodity at your tower. Over at the user's site, they have plenty of frequency left over, because they've only got one receiving antenna. And the more frequency you can use, the more speed you can get. And especially with like 60 gigahertz links becoming a thing, you're not going to have one tower for a region on 60 gigahertz. That's not going to work. Maybe you get 40 gigahertz, but then what? You're going to be paying $500 for your 40 gigahertz CPEs, which are what licensed CPEs normally cost. So yeah, there is enormous benefits to economies of scale with manufacturing a lot of antennas. And then there are enormous benefits to having more antennas in different places in terms of reusing the same frequency. So these, and these sort of start to compound on each other. And frankly, I was actually thinking about your question earlier, where do you see the WISP industry in 10 years? And I don't see towers being all that great in 10 years. How are you going to deal with this? Like if you wanted to keep a tower, how would you deal with it? And anyways, interesting questions for later.
How would you deal with keeping? We'll have.
Yeah, like how would you compete with a 60 gigahertz provider? Like you have. So like, let's say you have a tower, you have 40 gigahertz licensed. Your CPEs cost a bunch because they're not open market. You have a chunk of spectrum that's yours. That's great, but you only have so much of it at the tower, and you can't duplicate it by moving farther out into the field. How do you even compete throughput wise?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's what Jordan is saying is like he's saying like, hey, this sort of like community involvement model where you're putting
Hmm.
the micropops in the houses or grain silos or slow, that's right.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
and I think another thing too, kind of speaking on that, is that fiber is going to everywhere. So when I first started, we asked CenturyLink to give us fiber in a town that we do service in, and they would go nowhere near it. They didn't want anything to do with it. Then they got a huge grant and ran a giant fiber pipe right up the highway next to the town where we do service, and all of a sudden, 2 years later, it became a $1,500 a month gig circuit, and now they're talking about doing it for 800 a month. So I think a lot of what you're going to start to see is these fiber fed wireless sort of hybrid deployments where people have fiber in one place. They're using 60 gigahertz to hop it across the street, take it down the road on a fiber link, use 60 gigahertz again to hop it across the road, where you're sort of building all this middle mile fiber. And then once you have customer density that allows you to pull that long haul all the way back to the data center, you can light your whole network. And it's sort of, we call it prepaid deployment, where we sign everybody up on wireless, and then
Yeah.
once you hit customer density on a block, if they all share a common fence line, you can dig fiber on the common fence line and get easements from the property owners much easier and much more cheaply than you can get it from the city, because you're not having to tear up the street except for in one location where you bring the fiber in eventually. And so we sort of set up the network for the next 10 years with that in mind, where eventually we're going to just have all this little fiber, and then one magical day we'll run one big pipe all the way up it. And I kind of know you and I have been talking about, there's a
Yep.
lot of nonprofits that are really interested in running these big fat fiber loops. And if you
Mm-hmm.
can figure out a way to interact with those people, it's very possible for them to drop you an off ramp sort of in your neighborhood. And then it becomes, instead of tens of thousands or $5,000 a month for your service, you're in the $1,000 a month neighborhood. And that's a reasonable price for deployment. And, we have right
Yep.
now 4 different locations where we get our fiber from that basically make a big circle around the giant tower that we started on. And we went from being able to provide 15 megs to customers to now we're doing 100 on the top end. And so I think that all just sort of speaks to how that model, and it's been, 5 years only and I didn't even know how to log into a router and change my password 5 years ago. So the
Nice.
ability for me to be able to, I was a chef before this job. So the ability for me to be able to basically just drop everything I'm doing and pick up a new job the next day is one thing that I really like about this industry. And one thing that I really like about the way that you guys have set it up is that it seems like you could almost just wake up one day and decide you want to start a Wisp and roll it out of the box and go, which is usually the worst conversation you can have with people. But now it seems like something that's a lot more possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah. So, once again, this ties back to the fact that the real barrier with fiber deployment is often just talking to the homeowners, and the really big companies, they don't want to talk to homeowners. They refuse to, so they run fiber to some 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 large building, an office building, a library, school, et cetera, and they drop it because they're not going to talk to the homeowners. They're not going to deal with all the trouble. But if you're friendly with the
Yep.
homeowners, you can do it much more cheaply than CenturyLink ever could. And ultimately, local infrastructure is a local thing. It's about people on the ground that have to really do the job. Because any model where you're trying to plan a network from 3 states away and you're not on the ground there looking at what the reality is, you're going to end up spending 100 times more. And that's why you see these ridiculous models where it's like $5,000 a home or something for fiber or for fiber. When you go and you look at it, and you're like, I'm pretty sure I could do that for like maybe 300. Nothing crazy. um, but anyways, so we actually had a question in the chat about from Vulden, uh, and the question is: could an Althea network handle download connection speeds greater than 800 megabits per second for users? Do such speeds exist today on any Althea network? And the answer to that question is yes. Althea can work 4 gigabit or 10 gigabit. Now, these speeds are seen by very specific users, normally gateways or like backhaul connections. Right now, the issue with getting these speeds to regular clients is that the 60 gigahertz radios, which can do those sorts of speed and that we've experimented with, have really matured a lot over the last year or two. So they're just now coming into the point where they're really ready to be put into a link and you don't have to worry about them. Um, and then the client devices are just getting powerful enough to handle the encryption at that speed. So right now, you'd still need something with a fan. And I mean, it doesn't have to be big. It can be a tiny little box this big, but it's still got a little fan whirring in there. And a lot of people don't like that. So right now, yes, you can do gigabit. Um, but getting it into every client's home is something we want to do over the next, maybe 4 or 5 years, where the standard cheapest off the shelf hardware can do 800 megabits plus, as opposed to it being a thing that sort of comes with, well, there's an asterisk or two. Um, so that's sort of
Well,
the.
yeah, and I think let's frame this too, right? So the reality is that most people use about 4 megabits per second at any given time, and then maybe burst to like 20 megs. I mean, Jordan, you can probably speak to this as well too, or the changing trends. But most people are not going to need a gigabit of service, and really 100 megs is really down at the top of even a business user. So having the ability to do that. It is great, but it needs to be balanced with the overall cost of the deployment.
Yeah.
The number one reason why people don't have broadband access is actually not because there's lack of infrastructure. It's because they can't actually afford their monthly bills. So I think it's important to get broadband access. I think it's important to get close to that 100 megs as possible. But giving people extra capacity beyond that at the expense of cost isn't a good choice in most deployments. But yeah, I'd be curious too to hear, Jordan, have you seen like the ambient usage go up quite a bit, or like just the trends and changes over the last 6 years?
Well, up until January, no, not really. I mean, what you would expect when they go from 720 to 1080 or 1080 to 4K, there's nominal increase in traffic. But in the last couple months, we've seen a huge increase, not necessarily in spikes in the data usage, but just consistent. People went from using 4 megs to using 50 all the time, no matter what. Like someone's on the house doing Zoom or someone's in the house gaming, because now people don't leave in the daytime anymore. Like half of our customer base is home all day long, and now their kids are home all day long. And so you're basically like full on Game of Thrones all the time, where everybody's just on streaming. But generally speaking, we sell 3, 5, 7 meg packages as a majority of our service in every area except for one. And the only reason that we sell a 2550 as our base packages in that area is because we're competing with Charter, and it's in a town that's like a 2 square mile town where the customer density is so humongous that we were able to get away with having lower cost deployments and being able to offer higher speeds because we had a fiber drop right in town. But mostly, I think for a long time, the first 3 or 4 years, we were running on a 500 meg circuit with 300 or 400 customers. So you can do the math on that. And the average data use is pretty low. I mean, in my mind, the only reason you'd want to give somebody $800 or 800 megs is if you were in kind of a shooting match with a local provider who is doing those kind of speeds. But like, as you said, I've never seen any of our customers push over 100 for more than just a second, and only if they're downloading Windows updates or Xbox games, where you kind of just loose them on the network at whatever speed they can go.
Yeah, so I
But
think that there's a couple things to like touch on here, and that is that Althea's sort of elimination of speed tiers makes sense in this context, because in a lot of ways, you hand out these small, so like uh, as a wireless ISP, you pick your download packages based on what's not going to fry your network. Um, and if the system can keep your network up and just let users use whatever speed, nobody wants their customers to have slower speeds. I mean, it's like, well, why not if we can keep things stable? But in the old-fashioned world, that's the only way to keep things stable. And then everybody got so used to selling them and price discriminating based on tiers that they're like, well, of course we need to have speed tiers. How else would we even do it?
yeah,
And there's definitely been times where we have lost customers or not got customers because of things like that, where you're looking at, 15 megs for $70 a month. where that's just based on what we think that they're going to use on average. If I could say to somebody, you can have 100 megs if you actually need it, that's a much more attractive selling point for me, because you're not having to sort of corral people into what you can afford versus what you can get, which is a huge issue out here right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that also kind of segues into something else I wanted to kind of chat about for kind of some of our upcoming features. So one of the things, sometimes you do get a lot of resistance, right? We say, hey, it's per gigabyte, but these are, as much speed as you can get. But there's still some resistance because people are used to consuming their internet in speed tiers. So one of the things that I'm really excited about is some of the extra user controls that we're, putting into the network dashboard around kind of their choices of the speed they'd like to get, the prices that they want to pay. And then also, what's really exciting is that we're going to bring that great experience of the down to the device level. So right now, we build networks that bring 100 megs to the router, right? But people don't interact with the internet at the router. They interact with the internet on their phone or their smart TV or whatever else, right? So one of the things that was like one of these like aha moments for me is I went to a user who was getting 70 megabits per second to the router. Everything was cheery and happy, but their television was disconnecting and they were getting speed tests that were 3 megabits per second. And then, so I walk in their home and lo and behold, they had one of those curio cabinets with the little spoons up there. And then behind this curio cabinet with the spoons was the router. Right. So that I think led to some of the exciting work that we're doing now, where we're having dynamic Wi-Fi in the home, right? So that we can look at ensuring that experience goes from from the 100 megabits or something they have outside all the way down to the device level. And Dustin, please frame this in a more technical way here for me.
Well, so there's actually a lot going on. So there's user privacy preference. Okay. So there's user preference. There's user controls. Then there's operator integration. So we've got to balance two concerns. One, people do enjoy their privacy and they need to have that ability over their devices. Two, yep. People also very much appreciate it when somebody else solves their problems for them. And in fact, that's what people want most of the time. So you've got to balance these two things. So some of the features that we're working on in the future include include user price controls. So this is where the user can go in and say, hey, I don't want to use above this speed to control what I pay per month. Or say, like, I want to pay this much per month, make it happen. And that is entirely user controlled. The user has to do it. But the operator can see that it's done on their dashboard. So if that user calls up and says, my internet is slow, it's acting weird, they're like, well, I see that you've limited yourself to 5 megabits per second. You might want to turn that off. So, there's always a balance there between privacy and like visibility. Because in some ways you may want to argue, well, maybe the operator shouldn't be able to see that. But they have to in order to maintain the quality of the service for the user and understand what's going on. And the system also has to stop the user from doing stupid things like saying, I want to limit my connection speed at 1 kilobit per second, please. So there's that. So there's the like user and cost control side, because this ties back to what we were talking about before, which is where we can do gigabit with Althea right now. It's going to cost you like $400 in equipment. Nobody wants it because the people who actually need internet want the lowest cost service. They will take a $30 or $40 a month service 100 times before they take a $70 a month average service. And that's why we really focus on getting all of our routing, all of our bandwidth controls, all of our advanced features into the lowest common denominator router, the lowest cost device. Because playing the access game is about getting connectivity to people who couldn't otherwise afford it or wouldn't otherwise afford it. And then this brings into, and then it comes down to the actual experience in the user's home. People are using Wi-Fi, and they're not wired to their routers, so they're off somewhere, and typically they might place their router in a very bad spot, and not even know
Curious.
it. Like they could place it in a curio cabinet, they could place it on the wrong side of the house from where they normally are. It may even seem like a great spot to an installer. And this is where our next set of features come in, where the
On top of
devices.
their direct TV box.
Yes. Yeah. So,
The
or
giant network destroyer.
right in the sun where it will overheat every day. That happens too. Um, but the key parts of this feature are that if devices are consistently getting a bad experience, then that router will be flagged for the operator, and the operator can see like, hey, the average device on this user's Wi-Fi has a horrible signal. You should maybe go and take a look at that. Maybe call them up and say like, hey, is your service bad? And they'll be like, yes. Well, how did you know? So those sorts of things are important. And we're also hoping to provide more advanced features where the operator can change the user's home Wi-Fi frequency to try and keep it from conflicting with other things. And I'm really, really looking forward to pulling out some sort of. I've had some interesting ideas on frequency coordination to try and where multiple Althea routers, if they are deployed close together, will actually globally coordinate frequencies through our operator tools so that they efficiently allocate all of the user frequencies. And then there are some really crazy ideas, but I will talk about those after I implement them.
What? But yeah, that's and Jordan, you can chat a little bit too, maybe more about some of the friction points of running a WISP. But I think frequency coordination is like one of the, as far as like your from your AP side, is one of the more difficult or kind of friction points of running a WISP. I know I struggle with that from our side too. So we think that possibly having frequency coordination from the routers and then also from the the radio access point side too is something that we can add and benefit for our system.
Yeah, I mean, that would be great. And if you could implement something that had like a neighborhood watch where you could not only see your own routers, but the 10 million other things that are in the neighborhood. Because I know, like, in one of the cities we do internet, Charter puts all their routers on channel one for both 2, 4, and 5. And then they turn them up to 10 million and just blast them through the whole neighborhood. And you get 4 or 5 of them together in the neighborhood and they cannibalize themselves. So it's not even me that has to do anything to mess up their service. And that happens to us too, because then someone's like, oh, my internet's not working. They unplug their router, plug it back in, it changes channels. And then all of your frequency coordination just went out the window because every other router around that cascades its way through changing channels until you're back to square one again. So any kind of implementation that you can make that even monitors, let alone automatically updates frequencies to kind of manage your network. And then if that's implemented on both sides, I probably won't even have to come to work 5 days a week anymore. So, I mean, all of that sounds like something that I would, the more thing, and that all kind of goes back to the more things that you can do to make yourself more efficient to where, for every hour that I'm not in here dealing with that kind of stuff or taking customer service calls is an hour that I can be going and making sales or doing network expansion or scouting new areas or talking to new potential business clients. And so anything that anybody can provide that allows you to offload or generally just get rid of the things that make this job kind of suck sometimes is something that we should definitely pursue wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of so. Althea's ethos is that we bring all of those things to the table in a vendor agnostic way. So a variety of vendors have small aspects of this, but they're hardware siloed. So we want to bring these tools to our users as a platform and as in an agnostic way, so they can use what works best in their community and still have that benefit of all those features.
Yep. So it is my hope that we can provide a really good remote network mapping feature, and even do something where it'll keep track of your own antennas and help save people from their own poor documentation. Because if there's one thing I've found in the like Wisp world is that everybody has a spreadsheet with all of their frequency usage in there, and it's never right. It's never ever right. And having something where like you can go and get an active frequency map from anywhere right away, or and have something where all the routers in a neighborhood can sit back and sort of coordinate with each other to do the right thing, or at the very least coordinate with each other to avoid the bull in the china shop that is some device with a default channel that nobody thought of. Then that'll be very useful and solve a lot of the issues we have because um, you know it's weird. You go into a market with all these DSL customers and they get 5 megabits per second to their router over DSL on a good day. And you're like, well, that's definitely the problem. And then you go into the neighborhood and you start actually working with it and you're like, oh no, the problem is that they're all using 2.4 gigahertz Wi Fi only. And they're all on channel 1. And they're all in trailer homes right next to each other. And channel 1 of 2.4 gigahertz is just so completely screwed. Everybody gets 200 kilobits to their devices at most. And the DSL, the slow DSL, wasn't even the problem in this scenario. Because there's an even worse problem to deal with when it comes to
or the Wi-Fi extenders that are placed so far away.
Wi-Fi extenders placed so far away that they are just interference generators.
That's a constant. That's a constant problem. Exactly, that's a constant problem in our network, and I think that's another thing going to providing somebody with a managed router is you say to them like, hey, you don't have to worry about all this stuff anymore because someone goes and buys a Netgear router and a TP-Link extender and they don't talk to each other, and then they're calling you all day long to complain about their service, and you don't know until you truck roll out there that you're the one who broke your internet. It's not my fault. Then you have to charge a customer $50 and they get livid about it because all you did was unplug something and plug it back in again and now it works. So anything that you can do to kind of mitigate those issues from a global perspective is a must-have for this industry.
I think that really comes to the key of it because the customers don't, users don't see the internet as your router, right? They see the internet as their device, and that's the core here. So we need to make sure that the quality is to the device, and that's how we balance that with privacy, of course. But that's the vision. So networks that run smoother, faster, and then happier users.
Speaking on the privacy, none of our customers care whatsoever that we monitor all their internet at all. So I mean, I think that speaking towards that, they know that when they call, we can handle all of their problems, and as soon as we tell them that, they sign their life away for that kind of service. And so I think being able to provide that is good.
Yeah. Being able to is. Having to is not. So we have a lot of these features to do exactly that. And we have a little checkbox on there that lets people turn it off. And what ends up happening is that the people who prefer not to have any monitoring on their device other than, hey, it's on, are perfectly fine. When they have trouble, we call them up and they're like, I see your device is not working. I'm not sure why. Could you, do you want to enable monitoring for a minute so I can dig in there? And then they say sure, and then they shut it off later. And it's a minority that does this, but it's very important to provide these features. Because, in a lot of ways, I don't know. So, like, if you're making an axe, let's say you're a craftsman and you make an axe. I mean, if that axe hurts its user in some way, you've made a bad axe. And I don't want to make a bad router.
Well, wouldn't you use a robot in this, allegory here?
Maybe. I don't know. I like physical things.
I still think the rogue robot would be a better.
Rogue robot? Okay. Well, we will discuss metaphors later. We'll have a long discussion about appropriate metaphors.
One question I had for you too, Jordan, too. I'm really curious about how, and I think a lot of our probably viewers are as well, how you manage your installers, how many installations you do per day, or do you have any recommendations around that? I mean, I think that's one of the things that a lot of our folks starting on new networks try to figure out what those costs are going to look like and how they can make that more efficient. So I'd be really curious about your insights.
I have pretty much done it every single way possible. We went from just keeping everything written down to trying spreadsheets to Google Calendar to VISP and UCRM. Lately, what we've been doing, we run parallel billing software, mostly because I don't trust Ubiquity with my money in the CRM software, but it's gotten a lot better since the first time that we tried to use it. So we use VISP, which is Ultimate Back Office, and then we use UNMS and UCRM. So when a customer calls, we onboard them into the billing software, and then we have a script that, as I'm typing into the billing software, ports that into UCRM, which is synced to my Google Calendar, which through the UNMS app is synced to all the installers. So as soon as something comes into the office, we push it out to whoever. We have our network broken into 3 segments because we have 3 techs, east, west, and then me who does everything else. And so depending on where the call comes in from, we schedule it appropriately, and then we push that out to the device. And we had devices for all of our techs because at the time they weren't wanting to use their phones, so they have a company issued device. They get a notification if they're in the field. UNMS provides them with sort of a timetable on how long that job should take based on other jobs that they've done with similar requirements. So if it's a loco install, it's pretty safe to assume that you're not putting up a J-pole. And then we sort of developed that over the last 2 years, kind of what the timetable for each type of installation looks like based on parameters that you can get out of the site survey. And so we sort of run, say, installs per day sort of varies because out here, you might go to one house where it's a trailer and you're just poking a cable through the side of the wall. And then the next house you go to is a 2-story Victorian where they don't want any visible cables on the outside of the house. I think typically we're running about 90 minutes for an install start to finish. That's gotten a little faster lately because we have an office person now who manages all of our customer onboarding. So the technicians aren't having to do account setup and radio authentication in the field. The most installs we've ever done in a day was 18, and that was just recently with the 4 of us. We had everything sort of, and it was when we were testing out our new UCRM stuff. We had all of the radios pre-programmed in the office, all of the accounts set up, and then we just sort of dispatched 4 people to their jobs accordingly and had everybody do their own installs.
One person.
I think on a typical day, one person could.
Like, is it
one person per?
One person per current.
We had 2 jobs that required. One person per. They all just happened to be jobs that worked out to where no one was going up higher on the ladder than I felt comfortable with them on a 2-story roof, and none of the runs were really that difficult. Sort of depends on the job. If it's a 1-story house or the cable run is real simple, I'll send one guy out to do it. If it's something where they're going to have to be passing ladders up and down the roof, or someone's going 15 feet up on a roof with a really weird overhang or an angle or something like that, where anytime we have to suit up in the harness, I send 2 people just because it's safety for me is more important. Once you get one ding on your insurance, pretty much the end of your company. But on a typical day, a team of 2 guys can do 5 installs, just on typical installs where they're not right next to each other or something like that. So I think that's kind of a goal that we shoot for. And because we're a smaller company and my guys we don't have a tier 1 service right now, like all the calls come straight to us. And so I try not to run them too hard in the daytime. I think if you had a really good team of people that you could trust to go out in the field and solve problems on their own, that it would be possible to do 10 installs in a day if you had a front office that was capable of sort of mitigating the call flow to them. I think for us, that's the biggest issue, is that a lot of times when you're on an install, you're getting calls from other customers and you have to stop what you're doing and handle all their billing or do their credit card updating or all that kind of stuff. And so I think really that's the biggest drag on your time, is either the driving time between installs or all the other stuff that you have to do when you're on site.
Yeah, and I wanted to kind of share with like how that
got all your questions.
Yeah. I wanted to see, kind of what the standard looks like. I mean, and share also with our audience how this looks from the Althea perspective. So if you're an Althea network operator, a pure, Althea network operator, you're going to have a site with a splash page and a sign up for a new customer. They're going to go there, they're going to sign up, then they're going to get immediately directed to a calendar page where they can sign up for their site survey or install. then that's gonna get dropped into an email there where you can then reach out. The Althea operator can reach out to that customer and just touch base and make sure that time's going to work well for everyone. That's synced to that Althea operator's calendar and preferences about how they want that scheduled. So that's all kind of taken care of on the front end. That person signs up seamlessly, gets their first scheduled, all kind of in the back end there. And then they can go on and pay for their installation package right there on the Althea website too at buy.althea.net. And then your installers can you go out there with the site plan, already have that all in mind, and then call our dispatch as well to help with radio coordination, frequency coordination, and and aiming. So a lot of those things where you're going to get interrupted in your flow are taken care of through our funnels as well. And then when that installer is at the home, then that's when they onboard all that customer information right into the database that goes right back to your network operator tools. So you have that all there pre-recorded. So we've taken a lot of those like small friction points into a smooth funnel for operators.
Yeah, you don't need
And
anybody to
that's
help
something
you
that all
update your
sounds
credit card.
great from my point of view, because it's like, right, when we brought our new front office guy on, I had to teach him how to use 5 different pieces of software. Like, it wasn't just one place, and he was very frustrated for the first couple weeks because he came from a place where they just manage everything from a single pane of glass. And so for him to walk into this environment and have to look in one place to find the customer billing information, have to look in another place to find their deployment pictures and all of the information relating to their specific service, and then have to go to another place to schedule all of our installs and stuff. And then you get the Google Calendar problem where you might actually schedule something on your personal calendar and not forget to check the box that puts it in the company schedule. So then you get a missed call or a missed service call, and the customer's livid about you not showing up for your appointments. So I think all of that, and again, efficiency, if you can just have all of those things accessible to you in one place where the onus is on the customer to handle most of the things that they should be doing anyways, they just don't because they're lazy and have been trained that they can call us anytime they want to. I think that all allows you to be more profitable because you're not wasting time, which is money, on doing things that you shouldn't necessarily be doing anyways.
Plus, someone who is a chef before can roll out of bed and start a Althea network. So
right.
Yeah, and globally as well. So
yeah. I wish I would have known 5 years ago.
Well, we've been working hard trying to solve all your problems for the last few years.
Well, and also too, I mean, we were talking about redundancy and micropop stuff. I can't even tell you how much money I've spent on network engineers from faraway places to try to accomplish those kind of goals. And if someone doesn't understand your network and then you're trying to explain to them like, oh, hey, I have 50 micropops and I need to bring these things together on 48 microtik routers, and it just becomes this very complicated thing where it seems like you guys are providing all of that in one place with people who actually understand what they're doing. And so I'm definitely looking forward to working together on some projects.
Right. So the operators or your installers on the ground, they're not having to worry about routing. You take the router, you aim the antennas, and then you plug them together, and everything works. Mm-hmm. So yeah. I don't know if you have any other questions for Jordan, or we have anything from the audience here.
No, I'm not seeing any questions. Obviously, people are always free to submit them. But yeah, I think it's about time to wrap up and move on to part 2.
Yeah, so I know everybody is wanting an update on timelines and some blockchain stuff too, Justin. So I don't know if you wanted to kind of share a little bit about what's going on there. Everybody wants to know when.
Yeah. Everybody wants to know when. So yeah, for an update for our less how should I put it? For our less blockchain community focused people, we started work on Peggy, which is an Ethereum to Cosmos bridge, so that we could launch our Althea blockchain and bring funds over from Ethereum. And this means that we can It essentially gives us our pick of providers to accept users' debit cards and send them funds, and then our software takes care of getting the funds where they need to be, which would be over to the Althea blockchain where they can be transacted quickly and cheaply and work well. And this has really been the blocker to the launch of the Althea blockchain for the last uh, quite some time. We were ready a while ago, and we finally decided to sit down and do Peggy ourselves. Um,
We need
and,
it.
and of course, like what was it? Like 2 months after that? 1 month? 1 month after we well, 3 or 4 months after we had decided to start doing Peggy ourselves, suddenly Ethereum has become a bit more of a hot place to be recently, as far as money making goes with some of their newer smart contracts. And the Cosmos community is now very interested in having Peggy as a piece of software, as opposed to the sort of novelty it's been for the last year or two. So managing that has taken up a good bit of time, but it's also good because it means that we're probably going to be able to accelerate the launch of the Althea blockchain. I really want to have it done before the end of this year, and we're making really good progress actually on having Peggy ready to meet that deadline, so that we can seamlessly transition all of our existing users and use the same financial onboarding tools that we've been using so far. So yeah, if you're really interested in Peggy development, you should be planning on attending the public development stand-up Monday morning. Take a look in the Althea Twitter history or my Twitter history if you want to find that, and I'll put it in the chat in just a minute. Um, you
It's
know,
also going to be recorded,
yes,
right?
it
Because
will
it's
show up on our
yeah.
YouTube page about 4 hours after, however long it takes YouTube to decode a 4K video, which is unreasonably long. But anyways, so yeah, I am really looking forward to finally sort of wrapping up that odyssey and getting onto our own platform and really starting to deliver on the sort of uh, lower fee, high reliability telecom blockchain premise uh, that lets people that lets telecom providers interoperate and pay each other in a reliable and open way. If you ask existing internet providers why there's no way for them to cooperate with automated payments, they'll tell you because they don't trust credit card companies that much. And I'll tell you they're probably right about that, considering how much trouble we have, or everybody has, with just dealing with payment providers in general. Um, so the Althea blockchain is going to provide a neutral, open source, high reliability location where telecoms can work together and pay each other, um, and expect it to work. And it will be engineered from the ground up with the assumption that you need to be able to actually run things reliably. So things like CryptoKitties slowing down transaction times not acceptable. Things like chain halts not acceptable. There are a lot of unacceptable things that make existing blockchains not really useful for telecom and not really useful for the Althea vision of a world where ISPs can work together seamlessly using standard protocols like they do with TCP and IP. And then hopefully in the long term, we can make internet service for everybody faster and better because we will stop building duplicates of the most expensive part of internet service, which is the last mile.
Yeah, I think it's also important too to talk a little bit about the fact that it will still be a stable coin for our users as well and not a speculative one. Did you want to kind of flesh that out a bit?
Yeah. So that's actually one of the reasons why we need Peggy as a bridge to Ethereum, is that users' balances are held in DAI, which is a decentralized stablecoin pegged to the dollar, because users are typically not trying to gamble with their router balances. Um, so, uh, they want to pay for internet. Um, so we actually are going to be using the Peggy bridge to import DAI into our blockchain and get the stability advantage of a large stablecoin with hundreds of millions of dollars in value locked, and people its working to maintain its functionality. We get the advantage of all the other DAI users, but we also get the advantage of our more reliable telecom blockchain without having to build out a stablecoin financial system ourselves. So the way we see it, Peggy is a good value on development alone, just in avoiding that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. We have any other questions? I think lots of good stuff's coming. You'll hear more about Peggy and the Althea blockchain here in the short term. We'll have some probably further community blog posts out as well about the awesome stuff that we're doing and working together with Jordan here in Adopted Broadband in Oregon, potentially other places as well. And yeah, I think that could probably wrap that up then, huh?
Yeah, I think we've touched on about everything. I am looking forward to getting some of these new router features out the door as well. I'm sure the spectrum management features alone will how do I put it? I cannot even describe the amount of frustration I have had with Spectrum spreadsheets. It's There are no words. So I can't wait to get that out, and I have a big incentive to write it myself. Uh, so yeah, I am looking forward to that, and I'm looking forward to our next community call, where hopefully we'll have more news about more new and growing deployments.
Yep, absolutely. All right, find us all on Twitter, Discord, and on our blog at althea.net/blog, I believe. And we'll see y'all next time. Thank you again, Jordan, for being part of our call.
Yep. Thank you. Anytime.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.